Hi, I'm Taryn. My sister stole $230,000 from my son's college fund and had the nerve to remove me from the company I built from scratch. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how quietly it all happened. While I was trying to keep the peace, while I trusted, while I stayed loyal to a family that was already carving me out. One board vote, one forged signature, and suddenly I was the liability. How does a woman become a ghost in her own story? And what do you do when the people you thought would protect your child are the very ones putting her future at risk? The attic was musty, and the light from the single window wasn't enough to cut through the smell of old paper and wood. Callista had already taken over the sorting. She had her clipboard out, her blazer sleeves rolled neatly up to her elbows like she was prepping for surgery instead of going through our father's things. I followed her lead, but every time I picked up a file or opened a drawer, I felt like an intruder. Eleanor sat in the corner chair, hands folded, saying little. It wasn't surprising. She'd been quiet since the funeral, speaking only in clipped instructions or vacant observations like, "Your father always kept his keys there," or, "He never let me touch that drawer." I didn't expect warmth, but the silence still stung. Callista, as always, moved with that sharp competence that made everyone else feel like they were fumbling. "Can you hand me that red binder?" she asked without looking up. I passed it over. She flipped it open, scribbled something, and placed it in the archive box. I watched her for a moment. How easily she decided what stayed and what didn't. I knew better than to argue. My role in this family had always been more listener than speaker, more observer than participant. Then I saw the book. It was wedged between two accounting ledgers on a shelf, its spine barely visible. Building Trust in Family. I almost laughed. My father wasn't exactly subtle with his reading materials. I pulled it out, intending to glance through it, maybe find a margin note or highlighted passage. Instead, something slipped from inside and landed softly on my shoe. It was a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Precise, blocky, the way he always signed birthday cards. I opened it slowly. My intention is that both of my daughters be treated equally, not just in assets, but in control. Taryn has as much stake in this company's future as Callista. That's my wish. I froze. That wasn't what was read aloud 2 weeks ago. The will Callista presented said we split everything equally, yes, but it gave her full control. She was named the sole executor, with sweeping authority over decisions, finances, legacy, and I had accepted it, silently, stupidly. I remembered sitting in that room, Eleanor weeping quietly, Callista reading from the legal document like it was scripture. I remembered nodding, numb from grief, not questioning a single word. But the signature, the one on the letter I held now, it had that odd flourish he used only for personal letters. The will's signature? It had been cleaner, more formal, like a template. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. A message from Gavin. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, not since we finalized the divorce and agreed Jolie would live with me full-time. There was no reason for him to text me now. "I know it's none of my business, but I warned you about her." No hello, no context, just that. I stared at the message longer than I should have. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything I could say that would make sense. That night, we had dinner together. The three of us. It was the first family meal since the funeral. Eleanor had made her usual dry roast, and Callista brought a bottle of wine I hadn't asked for. She poured herself a glass and sat down, right in our father's chair. Neither of them blinked. Eleanor passed the rolls like nothing had changed. But I saw it. The way Callista's fingers drummed on the table. The way she folded her napkin just like he used to. The way she looked across the table like this was hers now. I didn't say anything. I chewed. I nodded. I watched. After dinner, I drove home in silence. Jolie was at a friend's. The house was still. I walked into my office and opened the small lockbox my father gave me 5 years ago. I hadn't touched it in ages. Inside were documents, birth certificates, old partnership notes, and a thick envelope with my name written in his hand. I pulled it out. On the front, it said, "In case they turn on each other." The envelope sat on the table, like it had something to say. I hadn't touched it since last night, but I hadn't stopped thinking about it either. Morning light poured through the kitchen blinds, casting long slats across the surface, and I sat there, still in the same sweatshirt I'd slept in, just staring at my name written in my father's handwriting. Inside, nestled between folded instructions and a copy of his old business ledger, was a scanned power of attorney, dated 11 months ago, signed by me. I remembered the day I'd signed it. Back then, I was running on fumes. Jolie had strep. The company payroll system had glitched again, and I hadn't eaten in almost 18 hours. I remember the office reeking of burnt coffee and panic. I was hunched over my desk, trying to juggle a conference call and a pediatric nurse who kept calling me about insurance updates. Callista had stepped in, looking composed and mildly annoyed. "This is just standard," she'd said, laying the paper down in front of me. "In case you're ever too overwhelmed to respond, it lets me help. This protects both of us." I was tired, distracted, and honestly, I believed her. I didn't read it. I just signed. Now I understood what that signature had really done. The document gave her access to every account linked to the company, including our joint college fund for Jolie. I pulled my laptop closer and opened the bank portal. My breath caught as I scrolled. 4 months ago, the withdrawals had started. Small at first, coded as Company Asset Reallocation. I blinked at the screen, then checked the fund's history again. Every dollar was gone, no alerts, no warnings, just a steady siphon, dressed up in professional terminology. I should have seen it, but I hadn't wanted to. Later that afternoon, I stopped by my mother's house to drop off a few old documents. Eleanor was watching television, a cooking show she didn't actually seem interested in. "There's a photo album on the table," she said without looking at me. "Take it home, would you? I don't want things cluttering the den." I picked it up, the leather cover worn and familiar, the kind of book families keep in sight but never really open. I waited until I was back home to flip through it. The pictures started in 2010. Callista at fundraisers, Callista at our father's retirement party, Callista standing beside Eleanor at Thanksgiving. Every frame was well lit and curated. I kept turning the pages, and I wasn't in a single one, not a birthday, not a barbecue, not even the group shot from Dad's 70th, where I remember standing on the end, right next to the dessert table. I remembered laughing, holding Jolie on my hip. But here, that side of the photo had been cropped clean. It was like I'd never existed. The erasure wasn't sudden. It had been happening slowly, subtly, and I'd let it. That evening, we had dinner together again. Eleanor had made a casserole that tasted like warm salt and not much else. Callista showed up late, kissed her mother on the cheek, and sat down, again, in Dad's old chair. No one mentioned it. Over dinner, Eleanor said, "Your sister's been doing so much for the company lately. We're lucky she's stepped up." I didn't answer, just chewed. Callista smiled. Not at me, not with kindness, but with that quiet satisfaction of someone who doesn't need to speak to be heard. They don't see me, I thought. They never really have. After dinner, I went home and sat at my desk, the bank screen still open. My eyes skimmed over the numbers again. I typed in the access credentials one more time, hoping maybe it had been a glitch. But it wasn't. Balance, 112.07. I closed the laptop slowly, folded my hands, and whispered to the empty room. "You did this, Callista, and I let you." The notification hit my inbox at 9:02 a.m. on a Wednesday. "Mandatory board realignment session," it read, flagged urgent, from an assistant I didn't recognize. I checked the calendar twice. No prior message, no heads up. Just that terse, formal line, like I was a stranger being told where to be. The invite listed Callista as acting executive chair. I sat back, Reread it again and again. I hadn't been consulted, not even a phone call. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from the recognition of a pattern too familiar to deny. 2 days later, I walked into the building I once opened every morning with keys still on my ring. The lobby gleamed with polished brass and fake plants. My name was still etched into the plaque near reception, but it already felt like a relic. The receptionist gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and handed me a printed agenda. "You'll want this," she said. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual, even though it hadn't changed. The boardroom was already half full: leather chairs, catered coffee, air smelling faintly of citrus and tension. Callista stood near the projector screen, chatting with one of the investors like she'd been born in that role. She didn't look at me. I scanned the room. My usual seat, the one I'd claimed for nearly a decade, wasn't at the head of the table anymore. The arrangement had been altered subtly, but deliberately. That seat now had a nameplate: Callista's. I paused for a second too long before slipping into a chair on the side. I built this floor plan, I thought. I chose that chair. No one said anything, but the air shifted slightly when I sat. I opened the agenda and froze. Under the section labeled Primary Stakeholders, there was a new name: Jolie Drayton, my daughter. Before I could speak, one of the junior board members leaned toward me with a half smile, whispering, "We assumed she'd be stepping in eventually. Legacy matters." I swallowed hard, nodded politely, and kept my hands folded in my lap. I couldn't afford to unravel here, not in front of them. Callista cleared her throat and clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up. "To ensure a sustainable vision," she began, "we propose a transition in executive leadership." No mention of gratitude, no nod to history, no acknowledgement that I had carried this company through 2 economic downturns, a pandemic, and more sleepless nights than I could count. Just a clinical sentence, read with precision. The vote was over in less than 5 minutes. They had rehearsed this. Smiles were polite, heads nodded, eyes darted. Everyone but me said yes. And I said nothing, not because I agreed, but because it was already done. I kept my expression still, but my right hand clutched the armrest. My nails dug into the leather. My mind raced. Not with confusion, but with the numb clarity of betrayal that had taken its time arriving. Afterward, no one met my gaze as they filed out. I walked slowly to the women's restroom, locked the door, stared at myself in the mirror. My badge still hung around my neck like a name tag at a party I was no longer invited to. I pulled it off, folded it into my palm like it might crack. "They didn't just remove me," I whispered to the tiled silence. "They're replacing me." I drove home in silence. The streets of downtown blurred past my window like chapters I wasn't ready to close. The moment I walked through my front door, I dropped my purse, opened my laptop, and tried to log into the shared corporate system. Access denied. I refreshed the screen. Same result. I sat back, heart steady now. I reached into the cabinet near my desk and pulled out an old flash drive. Labeled in my handwriting, "Early Day Financials, Personal Ledger Copy." It wasn't just a backup. It was a lifeline. That file wasn't just for records. It was my safety net. And now, it was my only weapon. I was parked across the street from Jolie's school, engine idling, watching kids pour out of the building in their backpacks and team hoodies. The late afternoon sun streaked the windshield, warming my face, but the cold was inside me, settling in deeper every second. I pulled up the login screen for the college fund account again, holding on to some faint hope it had been a glitch. Maybe a firewall update, maybe temporary access reset, anything. I typed in my credentials, twice. Access denied. My eyes stayed fixed on the screen while my fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard. Every time I tried to understand how far this had gone, another trapdoor opened beneath me. The fund I had started when Jolie was 6. $200 a month at first, then more when the company began growing. Callista said she'd match it. She never did. Jolie stepped out of the building then, chatting with another girl, laughing, her hair pulled back in a braid like she wore for field trips. My chest tightened. She spotted the car and jogged toward it. As she reached for the door, a woman, one of the PTA regulars, stepped into her path. I cracked the window just enough to hear it. "Your mom's not still fighting about that company mess, right?" Jolie's body stiffened. Her smile faltered. She didn't reply, just nodded politely and slid into the car. The silence in that car was heavier than anything Callista ever said to my face. We didn't speak on the drive home. Jolie stared out the window, and I kept my hands at 10 and 2 like we were mannequins in a safety video. She didn't need to know what I was thinking. She probably already knew. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Jolie's name on the screen. I answered, confused. She was still at school, probably in the counselor's office. "They called me in," she said quietly. "The financial aid officer." I didn't breathe. "They flagged the account activity, said the withdrawals looked like an asset transfer. They think we lied on the FAFSA." Her voice cracked on the word lied. I felt everything inside me freeze. "I didn't lie, Mom. I swear I didn't." "You didn't," I said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." She sniffed softly, then hung up. I stayed in my home office that evening. I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the lights. The glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows over the stacks of old paperwork, reminders of when I still thought being meticulous was enough to protect us. I reached for the folder labeled CEO Archive Personal. Inside, right where I'd left it, was the file. Payroll, Reversals, CallistaAuth.pdf. I opened it slowly, scanned the highlighted rows, withdrawals, approvals, shadow entries under project codes that didn't exist anymore. My jaw clenched. She hadn't just stolen money. She had made it look like I signed off on it. Every dollar gone from Jolie's fund had my name floating somewhere in the metadata, obscured but traceable. I closed the file, sat back. There was no more disbelief left in me, just precision, like a needle honing in on a vein. I picked up my phone, opened a new message to Callista. "You didn't just take from me, you took from my daughter." I stared at the words, read them again, deleted them. Instead, I opened the browser and typed one word: whistleblower. I didn't hit search right away. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment, hearing my father's voice in my head, the way he used to say, "If you want to hold your ground, first know where you're standing." That night, I didn't dream about family dinners or boardrooms or apologies I'd never get. I dreamed of numbers, and I woke up ready to face the math of betrayal. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. Jolie's voice kept echoing in my head, those 4 words she'd whispered like a confession. "They think I lied." I kept hearing it on loop, each time angrier than the last. By the time the sun started climbing above the rooftops, I was already in my car, headed to Eleanor's. The roads were quiet, but my pulse wasn't. Every mile that passed, I reminded myself, I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't beg. I would be still and sharp. The house looked the same, trimmed hedges, flower beds too perfect to touch. I stepped through the front door without knocking. Callista's voice echoed from the kitchen. When I walked in, she was already at the breakfast table, dressed like she was heading to a bar class. Leggings, perfect bun, no sweat. Eleanor sat across from her in her robe, quietly stirring tea. They looked like a well-oiled image from a lifestyle magazine, until I pulled out the chair and sat down. "Did you move money from Jolie's college fund into a company account?" Callista didn't blink. "Good morning to you, too." "Did you?" She took another sip of her smoothie. "That money was never just yours, Taryn. It was part of the family pool." Family pool. That's what she called the account I'd funded, tracked, and protected for over a decade. The account under my name. The one our father helped me start. Family pool. Like she'd just borrowed the garden hose. I didn't look at Eleanor. I didn't need to. She hadn't flinched, hadn't gasped. Just stirred her tea like she always did when things got too real. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't clench. I just stood. On the way home, the rage caught up to me. At a stoplight, I checked my phone. There it was, Callista's latest post, timed perfectly with the morning meeting I hadn't been invited to. A smiling photo of her in a blazer, standing next to our father's portrait in the office lobby. The caption read, "Sometimes we're forced to lead when others step back. Grateful for the chance to stabilize what my father built." Stabilize. She'd hijacked my story and turned it into her hero's journey. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I took a screenshot and saved it. Back at the house, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the screen again. The notification bar filled with likes and heart emojis from people who didn't know anything real. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I picked up, I heard the voice and knew. "Taryn, it's Marcy. Weller. I'm not really supposed to call you." She was one of the quieter board members. Been there since year 4. Always sat near the corner. Never spoke unless directly asked. "What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated. "You didn't hear this from me. But Callista's been pushing to rewrite the charter since January. The board restructure wasn't a response. It was planned." My breath caught. She's been reworking the bylaws, committee voting rights, executive decision chains. She's basically consolidated the power of 3 roles into one. I sat in silence. "Taryn, she planned this." I nodded slowly. "Thanks for telling me." "No one else will," she said softly. "They're all scared." I hung up and set the phone down. I didn't speak, didn't move. I just pulled out a yellow legal pad and drew a line right down the middle. On the left, I wrote, "What she took," and I listed it all. College funds, my title, public perception, relationships, authority. Then on the right, "What she fears I know." It wasn't a long list, but it was sharp. Paper trails, voice memos, signatures I never gave, minutes I wasn't in. The kind of things that don't shout, but slice. I pressed the pen so hard it almost split the page. I tore it out, folded it, slid it into a new file folder I'd labeled Exhibits. Finally, I printed out her social media post, the one where she painted herself as the martyr. I folded it neatly and tucked it in behind the list. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled past family, past clients, past everything that belonged to my old life. I stopped at one name, Rachel. I hit dial. "Rachel," I said, "I need a financial forensics consult. Quiet, fast, and legal." "If this is war," I whispered to myself after I hung up, "then I'll speak the language they respect, clean, calm, and corporate." Jolie didn't speak when she walked in. She just placed the envelope on the counter with a calm that didn't belong on a teenager's face. Her backpack slid off her shoulder, landing beside the stool with a dull thud. She didn't take off her shoes, didn't grab a snack, didn't make eye contact. I stared at the envelope like it was ticking. I waited until she was halfway up the stairs before I reached for it. The Stanford logo was the first thing I saw. My stomach tightened. I opened it slowly, as if gentleness could change what was inside. "Dear Ms. Hollowell, we regret to inform you, due to inconsistencies in verified financial backing." I stopped reading. So that's how it felt, watching your child's future bleed out through a paragraph. I set the letter down and walked toward her room. The door was open. She was sitting on her bed, headphones on, staring at a blank laptop screen. "Jolie." She took the headphones off but didn't look at me. "I didn't know," I said. "They didn't. I just want to stop explaining your mess to people." Her voice didn't crack. It landed clean, sharp, like she'd practiced it. Not out of spite, out of fatigue. "I'm not mad at you," she added softer. "I'm just tired of pretending I don't hear what they say." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just nodded and stepped out quietly. The silence in my car an hour later was louder than her voice. I drove to a storage unit on the edge of town, one I hadn't opened in over 5 years. I still had the key, rusted but intact. The unit smelled like old cardboard and forgotten ambition. I dug through boxes labeled Phase 1, Tax 2014, vendor contracts, until I found the one marked MISC Corporate. Inside, buried beneath outdated phone chargers and branded pens, was a sealed envelope. The name on the card was C. Hollowell, but the transactions were mine. Or rather, they were made in my name. Someone had used this card, my name, to pay for things I never approved. Flights, hotel stays, meals labeled board retreat, booked months after I was ousted. I stood there with the card in my hand, the proof of impersonation pulsing in my palm. Back home, I scanned the transactions and emailed them to Rachel with a note. "This one's loud." Her reply came 30 minutes later. "Give me 72 hours. If she moved money, I'll find the fingerprints." I sat at the dining table that night and cleared everything off. Plates, candles, decorative napkins, all gone. In their place, I laid out manila folders. What I know? What I can prove? What I'm ready to say? I printed the statements, labeled the PDFs, cross-checked the timestamps. Not from anger, not anymore, from clarity. Then my phone buzzed. It was from Callista. Just one line. "You're not helping anyone by digging, Taryn." I stared at the screen, set the phone down, face down, and returned to highlighting rows on a spreadsheet. If she thought I would back down now, she had underestimated the woman she buried for years. It was a knock, not a bell. A quiet, polite knock, like the one that comes with bad news wrapped in courtesy. I opened the door and met a man in a gray suit who didn't even ask if I was Taryn Hollowell. He already knew. He handed me a thick envelope, offered a slight nod, and turned back to his car. I stood there with that envelope in my hand, the weight of it familiar by now. The words at the top were bold and cold. Notice of civil suit. Callista was suing me. Financial misconduct, defamation. The language was clean, like all legal documents, sterile, bloodless. But the message was sharp. She wants me buried before I can speak. I took a breath, set the papers on the kitchen counter, and picked up my phone. It rang twice before Eleanor answered. "Taryn?" "I need you to testify," I said. My voice wasn't pleading, just steady. "You don't have to pick sides. Just speak to what you know, what you saw, the facts." There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe the line had gone dead. "I can't be in the middle of this," she said finally. "I just can't." "You've been in the middle your whole life," I replied. "You just chose not to act like it." She didn't respond. I didn't wait for her to. An hour later, Rachel called. "I found 3, she said. 3 unauthorized transfers buried in a reserve category Callista renamed 6 months ago." She was pacing. I could hear it in her breath. "Same access key across all 3. Yours. But the metadata tags linked to her device. We can trace that." "Is it enough? To press criminal inquiry?" "Yes. But this route goes public, Taryn. There's no walking it back." "I'm not here to whisper anymore," I said. "We fight clean. But we fight loud enough she hears it." That afternoon, I met with the legal team Rachel had connected me with. 3 women in a modest office downtown who spoke in clipped phrases and kept receipts in plastic sleeves. "If she's suing you, you need to counter." "Now?" one of them said. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. "She controls the narrative. You'll be defending your name in a courtroom, not asserting your truth." I nodded. "Then I'll win loud, but documented." By early evening, I was back in my car, circling a familiar block without meaning to. I pulled into a side street across from Eleanor's house. Through the front window, I saw her, sitting on the couch, wineglass in hand, laughing with Callista. They looked so normal, like this was Tuesday, like I hadn't been erased from both boardroom and family room. I didn't slow, I didn't honk, I drove on. That was the moment it broke, not my spirit, not my resolve, just the last frayed thread of needing anything from them. I got home, walked straight to the printer, and pulled up the countersuit I'd spent the last week building with the legal team. I read it once more, top to bottom, Then I hit print. Pages slid out slowly, each one a nail in the false image Callista had worked so hard to sell. At the end, I added one final exhibit, a screenshot of her most recent social post. Leadership isn't always popular, but it's necessary. No signature, no apology, just manufactured poise. I slipped the documents into a manila folder labeled Submission Final. Then I pressed send on the scanned copy. She dragged me into the courtroom. I'd drag her into the light. The envelope came before dawn. No return address, no name. Just slid under my front door like a whisper. I almost didn't see it, stepped over it on my way to start the coffee. But something about the weight of the paper made me pause. Inside was a USB stick and a note written on lined notebook paper. She said too much to too many. This one wasn't smart enough to delete. No signature. But I recognized the handwriting. Kyle Mason, my former operations manager. He had always been quiet, observant, a man who clocked everything but kept his head down. I hadn't heard from him since he left 2 years ago, but he knew where the bones were buried. I plugged the USB into my laptop. It was a Zoom recording, time-stamped from 3 months ago. I pressed play. Callista's face filled the screen. She was mid-conversation, smirking just enough to make me nauseous. "Move it under reserves," she said, waving a hand. "We'll explain it as reallocation if she ever wakes up. She's emotional, not strategic." Her voice echoed in my kitchen like a hammer hitting glass. I hit pause. The silence afterward wasn't relief. It was ignition. By mid-morning, I was at the nonprofit legal center where my whistleblower team was based. We sat in a conference room with a whiteboard covered in timelines and names, evidence photos pinned beside footnotes. "I'm not dropping this in a courtroom just yet," I told them. "We release it publicly, controlled, no editing. Let them hear her say it." "Platform?" one of the attorneys asked. "Local, direct, nothing flashy. It just has to live." We partnered with a community news outlet, small enough to fly under Callista's radar, big enough to go viral. By noon, the video was cued and scheduled. I parked in a quiet lot near a city park and waited. At 12:01, it went live. I watched on my phone as the view count ticked past 1,000 in less than 10 minutes. The comment section lit up. Screenshots started circulating. People who'd smiled at Callista at brunches and ribbon cuttings were now asking, "Did she really say that?" At 12:19, the moment hit. The clip froze on her face, mid-sentence. "She's emotional, not strategic." That was the line. By 12:30, it had over 20,000 views. Shares climbed. Someone reposted it with the caption, "CEO turned con artist." I closed my laptop slowly and leaned back against the seat. Breathed. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Relief. Meanwhile, across town, Callista was at a corporate brunch at the River Oaks Club. They were honoring women of ethical leadership. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't so predictable. Her phone started buzzing during the salad course. One, then another. Then a cluster of heads turned toward her table. A PR assistant leaned over and whispered something. Her expression changed. I didn't need to be there to hear the glass shatter. At 2:04, my phone lit up with her name. One message. "You're destroying everything. I hope you're proud." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I turned the screen over on the passenger seat and let the silence answer for me. That evening, I walked back into the nonprofit office, portfolio under my arm. I passed a whiteboard in the hallway. It read, "Whistleblower Impact Panel, Guest Speaker." Someone was just now writing my name beneath it. Taryn Hollowell. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because it was over, because I had finally begun. The clip played on a loop, one I didn't ask for, didn't want, but couldn't stop from running on every local channel and feed I scrolled past. Callista, polished as ever, sitting in a studio with soft lighting and a perfectly pressed navy blouse. The anchor leaned forward, feigning neutrality, and asked her point blank, "Are the accusations against you true?" Callista tilted her head, that same slight curve to her mouth like she was amused. These allegations are delusional and desperate, she said, voice steady, eyes fixed on the camera. I've tried to help my sister, but she refuses to be helped. I sipped my coffee. The bitterness didn't come from the drink. She had always been good at speaking lies with a tone of concern, as if betrayal was kindness. The kettle clicked off behind me. I didn't move. Later that day, Jolie sent me a message. Just a link, no context. It was a clip from a luncheon held the previous evening, an awards event for local women leaders, hosted by a group Eleanor never missed. I clicked play. Eleanor stood at the podium, smiling faintly, holding a glass award. She looked proud, poised. My daughter Callista is the one holding this family together, she said, eyes glistening. She always has been. The room applauded. I closed the laptop before it finished. Didn't throw it, didn't cry. Just unplugged it, set it aside, and sat in the quiet. That was the real fracture. Not court filings, not bank statements, but hearing your own mother praise your sister for carrying a family you were never allowed to belong to. I called Rachel as the sun dipped below the rooftops. They're shifting the story fast, I said. I know, she replied. But listen, we're on better footing than they are. Public perception flipped. Now this isn't just legal, it's ethical, and that's harder for her to fake. There was a pause. People are watching, Taryn, she added. I'm not backing down. I never thought you would. By nightfall, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kyle Mazin on my porch. He looked older than I remembered, a little more gray at the temples. He held out a small flash drive. These are old internal memos, he said. Ones she tried to erase after you left. I kept backups. Why now? I asked. I stayed quiet too long, he said, eyes meeting mine. You gave me a reason not to. I didn't thank him out loud, just nodded, the kind that says more than any speech ever could. After he left, I went upstairs. The guest room still had boxes stacked in the corner, ones I hadn't opened since I moved back into this house after the divorce. Labels like someday and if needed. I peeled the tape off one. Inside were journals, photos, sketches, for a second business I never started. I didn't cry. I unpacked. Not because I had time now, but because I had truth now. This space would no longer hold forgotten things. It would hold me, as I was, as I had become. At midnight, I sat on my bed, a glass of water in hand, and reread the messages I'd received that week. Half support, half threats. A mix of empathy and skepticism that would have made the old me spiral. Now, I just filed them. She chose image, I whispered. I chose truth. Now let's see which one leaves a deeper mark. I opened a blank document and began drafting a personal statement for the next legal filing, one that wouldn't just defend me, it would define me. The envelope was thin, professional, no fanfare, just one folded page inside. A letterhead I recognized immediately. The new board. It wasn't an apology, not even close. It was an official offer. Strategic ethics consultant. A position they claimed was necessary to reestablish internal trust and transparency. It wasn't the job they took from me. It was the one I had earned through fire. I placed the letter next to my coffee and stared at it without blinking. The word that hovered in my mind wasn't satisfaction. It was balance. The quiet kind. The kind you don't cheer for, but feel settle in your bones like something overdue. 2 days later, I was standing behind a lectern in a modest press room, not at a corporate event, not on a stage. Just a room filled with folding chairs and quiet listeners. A nonprofit had invited me to speak on ethical leadership, and I said yes. Not because I needed a platform, but because I had something left to say. The room was still. A woman in the third row raised her hand. How did you manage the legal pressure without breaking? I took a second. By remembering who I'd break if I didn't stand up. There wasn't applause, just stillness, which meant they heard me. After the event, I drove home slowly, traffic forgiving for once. The sky had just begun to pinken at the edges. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a small gift bag sitting on the front step. No card. Just tissue paper folded neatly inside. I brought it in and sat on the couch, peeling it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, a printout from a crowdfunding campaign titled, "Legal Defense for My Mom." It showed 56 donations, mostly small, names I didn't recognize. At the bottom, in handwriting I knew by heart. I didn't know how else to help. Love, Jolie. I smiled through tears, not the weeping kind, just a soft release, the way tension drains after being held too long. My daughter hadn't asked for credit. She had acted when I didn't even know I needed it. Later that evening, the local news ran a quiet segment, less than 2 minutes. Callista Hollowell has stepped down from her role as interim executive to focus on personal matters. The board has not commented on internal investigations, but sources suggest a third-party audit is underway. No mention of me, no correction of the story she tried to spin, just silence wrapped in legalese. I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat. She built her fortress with my silence. When it fell, I just walked away. The next morning, Rachel and I met for coffee at a small place near the bayou. She handed me a small flash drive in a black envelope. "All records sealed," she said. "Everything's locked in. No more leaks. No more surprises." "What do I do with it?" I asked. "You can burn it, or you can keep it." I looked at the flash drive for a moment, slipped it into my purse. "I'll keep it," I said. "Not for revenge, for a reminder." By nightfall, I was back in bed, the moonlight crawling slowly across the ceiling. Jolie had gone to sleep hours earlier. The house was quiet in a new way, less heavy. I opened a fresh notebook, one I'd bought months ago and never used. On the first page I wrote, "The truth doesn't always win, but it remembers who stayed silent." Then, just beneath it, "Inheritance and integrity." Some stories don't end. They evolve into warnings, into legacies, into proof that silence never saved anyone. I was cleaning out the digital clutter when I found it. An old voicemail buried under alerts and auto-renewals, marked "Saved." No timestamp, no subject. I tapped it out of curiosity, expecting static or one of those pocket dials my dad used to leave before his hearing aids caught up to the century. Instead, his voice filled the quiet. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but remember, blood doesn't always mean trust." That was it. 20 words. Recorded the week before his stroke. He hadn't said it like a warning, more like a truth he'd waited too long to name. I didn't sob. My throat tightened, sure. My chest ached. But there were no theatrics, just the kind of tears you learn to blink back out of habit. The next morning, I took a small box from the hallway closet, mahogany with brass hinges. It held the pocket watch my father carried every day of his life. On the back was a tiny engraving, RH, Time Matters. I drove across town with the box on the passenger seat. I didn't rush. I didn't rehearse. Eleanor's porch looked exactly the same. Hydrangeas too perfect to be real. Wind chimes that hadn't moved in weeks. I stood there for a moment, then rang the bell. She answered in a robe, hair pinned, her expression flickering from surprise to neutrality in seconds. "I won't come in," I said. I handed her the box. "He would have wanted you to have this." She didn't open it, didn't ask why, just nodded. I turned and walked back to the car. There were no final words, no breakthroughs. I wasn't angry, just done asking for something she'd never learned to give. Driving away, I passed the tree-lined yard I used to play in. A memory uninvited landed in my lap. Me at 12, clutching a certificate from school. I had gotten second place in the science fair. I'd worn a red dress, the one my aunt sewed. Callista had won something bigger that day, debate champion or student of the month. I couldn't remember now. What I did remember was standing on the porch holding that paper while everyone clapped for her inside. No one had come out. Some patterns weren't born in adulthood. They were inherited. Back home, I didn't sit down. I started rearranging my office, cleared the old bulletin board, stacked the legal briefs, boxed the contracts. Then I pulled out the first printed draft of my manuscript. Silent accounts. A woman's ledger of loss and power. Not a tell-all, not a weapon, a mirror. It was quiet in the house when Jolie came in, dropping her backpack with a sigh. She looked tired but proud, her blazer wrinkled from debate practice, shoes muddy. "You know what topic they gave us?" she asked, tugging off her earrings. "What?" "Power isn't taken, it's given away." I raised an eyebrow. "You say that in front of a panel of judges?" "Not yet," she smirked. "But I will." We didn't say anything else, didn't need to. That line sat between us like a truth we'd both earned. Later that night, I opened a fresh folder. I labeled it Legacy. Inside, I slipped a USB with one file, my father's voicemail. On the tab, I wrote one word: unspoken. Then I turned to my laptop, opened a blank document, and typed the final chapter header for my book. The text came just after sunrise. I was slicing an apple in the kitchen, the knife moving in slow, even strokes, when my phone buzzed once on the counter. From Eleanor. "You won! I hope you know what it cost all of us." I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering above the screen. No reaction, no flare of heat, just a slow, full breath as I swiped it left and hit delete. No archiving, no rereading. Just gone. That was the difference now. Before, I would have crafted a response, tried to translate my grief into diplomacy. Now, I understood some words didn't need answering. Some people didn't either. 3 days later, I stood in the back room of Willow Leaf Books, a small indie shop tucked behind a florist. It wasn't packed. No media wall. Just about 24 folding chairs, a stack of my books on a card table, and a poster on an easel that read, "Silent Accounts, a Woman's Ledger of Loss and Power." I read an excerpt, answered questions, and signed names. There was a woman, mid-50s, with tired eyes, who waited until the room had mostly cleared. When I signed her copy, she leaned in and whispered, "You gave me words for what I lived through." I didn't know what to say. I just reached out and gently touched her hand. Afterward, I walked the 2 blocks to my car, the air brisk but not biting, the kind of cool that makes you feel sharper somehow. At home, I set the book copies on the kitchen island, fed the cat, and opened the curtains wide. The light that poured in wasn't soft, it was clear, unapologetic. I sat down at the table and scrolled through the updates. Callista had stepped down from the last board position she clung to. Official statement said, "Personal matters." No investigation followed, not publicly anyway. She had disappeared from the business pages. The quiet was louder than a headline. Jolie had been accepted into a local university. She hadn't told me with fireworks, just slid the envelope across the counter one night and said, "Guess I'll need a new backpack." She had been lighter since, still fierce, but freer. Rachel had taken on 2 new whistleblower clients. She sent me an email that simply read, "Still no one like you, T." I didn't reply. She didn't need me to. And Eleanor, there had been nothing since the text. No calls, no cards, no guilt-tripped invitations. Just absence. I had thought it might hurt, but it didn't. It felt like finally having space to think, without someone breathing down your back. One afternoon, I walked past the building that used to house Hollowell & Co. My name was gone from the door. The signage had changed, new font, new colors, and yet I didn't feel erased. That chapter didn't end me. It just finished itself. Back at the house, I stepped into my office. The walls had been repainted, the rug was new, and on one wall, framed in brushed gold, was the final quote I had printed for myself. "Your silence served them, your voice saved you." Jolie walked by, peeked in. She read the quote again for the 100th time, gave me a small smile, and kept walking. Nothing needed to be said. That night, I made tea, curled into my chair, and pulled out a fresh notebook. I flipped past the first few empty pages and began writing. I didn't get justice in the way people expect. I got it in the way I needed, by surviving on my terms. And I'm still here. I let the pen hover for a moment. Then, at the top of a clean page, I wrote 2 words. Next story. Looking back, I realize now that survival isn't just about walking through fire. It's about knowing when to stop waiting for others to rescue you. It took me years to understand that being quiet didn't make me gracious. It made me invisible. The day I chose to speak, to document, to hold the line, I didn't just save my daughter's future. I reclaimed my own voice. If you've ever felt erased by someone you love, overlooked in a room you helped build, or blamed for setting boundaries, you are not alone, and you're not broken. Sometimes the most dignified kind of justice is living well without needing permission. So now I ask you, what truth have you held back to keep the peace? What legacy are you shaping by staying silent? If this story moved you, leave a comment with one, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to hear why. Every voice matters here. And hey, if you're someone who believes in the power of real stories, stories that carry grit, heart, and healing, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Your story matters too. Let's keep this conversation going.